together with our estimated panelist, Людмила Denisova, Ukrainian representative, also Mr. Kenneth Reitz, who is lawyer and also executive director of Human Rights Watch. We will discuss what should we do to stop this war, what should we do to defend human rights in Ukraine. I'm very happy to introduce to us our panelists, and my first questions will be to Lyudmila. Lyudmila, could you please say us what is really happening now in Ukraine? Because you are dealing with this each day, and you really know each Russian war crimes, what is now done in Ukraine.
Що відбувається в нашій країні? В нашій країні
In our country, we have a very cruel war going on. Russian mercenaries are destroying, eliminating our country, eliminating our people. Do you understand? People always ask, how many victims are there now? How many people perished? Now it is impossible to say, to calculate it. We are sitting here now in such a nice place with the good weather, and we're in good mood almost. So many people are walking along the streets, but now our citizens are being shot. They are bombarding using unconventional weapons. They are using cassette bombs, missiles, different types of missiles. These are the weapons that are striking awfully, and the number of losses when our cities and towns are bombarded is impossible to calculate. It will be possible to do so after we liberate all the cities and towns, after we put away all these debris. But the main thing is not to calculate the victims, but to prevent, so that in the future we don't have it. So again, in 90 days, there's no repetition of that, and that is why myself and my office, we work 24 hours, 7 days a week. We have a hotline, and our citizens call, and there are more than 44,000 of those who called us. We registered crimes against 87,000 people. We have the hotline where we provide psychological assistance. Psychological help is provided to people who call us and who need such help. You understand? When our psychologists hear these awful tragedies, and such people who talk about that, they want to commit suicides. Our psychologists, it's very difficult for them, but they do a very important and difficult work. And some of our citizens are brave enough to give us the opportunity to talk about their tragedies. Do you understand that? That opens up a little bit the tactic of war by Russians. And they systemically, everywhere, with the awful cruelty, they're raping and they commit other sexual violence, and they kill our people, and that is a separate weapon of Russian Federation. And we need to talk about that, because we need to stop raping of our children, of our women. Why are they doing it? They're doing it so that we, our women, never have a chance to give birth to children, or so that they don't want to do that. That means that it is a genocide of Ukrainian people, because there are no children, no nation, no country. And it is very important that the world understands it, that the world is impossible, because it's impossible to just negotiate with Putin so that he stops shelling and bombarding. And that's not the peace that our country, our guys, our armed forces are looking for. and they are doing everything so that you can have a morning coffee at home. And this is our life. And one more thing I would like to mention here and draw your attention to, we have a big issue when our people leave their homes. Yes, there are more than 6 million who left our country. I thank all the countries, all the peoples of these countries that they gave refuge to our citizens. 8 million left the dangerous or territories where it's dangerous, but we still have 1,400,000 which were deported forcefully by Russian Federation to the territory of the Russian Federation. And when they say, well, that's a fake, maybe they themselves went there, it's like a tourism. No, my dear. I have convincing evidence, and I can demonstrate to you that Russian Federation in advance was preparing this forceful deportation. It was planned for 2 million of our citizens. I have directives that were issued by the leadership to certain bodies to set up the temporary points of placement of our citizens, and we know where they are and in which conditions they are. And we also thank the Russians who are volunteers, who are raising money and who give this money and clothes and food, and they provide support to our citizens. We know about that. We know where they are. And this should be resolved at the international level so that our citizens are returned to our country, because Russian authorities, they are putting our children to Russian schools. I have textbooks and recommendations for teachers how they should do it. They teach in Russian language, and that means that they destroy, eliminate the national identity of people. That is the sign of genocide of our people, and every day we need to talk about that so that Ukraine stays an independent country within the borders recognized by the international community. We request you, each one, to remember about that. If we do not fight for the freedom for ourselves, freedom for you, thanks to the weapons which you provide and thanks to the sanctions, then they will come to you. I don't want this to happen. Thank you. Дякуємо дуже, Людмило, за те, що ділитеся з нами такими доказами і з нашими гостями. Ви працюєте
more than 20 years, and you have experience with war crimes all over the world. Could you please share your expertise on this internationally and especially on Ukraine? Because I know that Human Rights Watch has published recently a report on what's going on in Ukraine.
Yes, well, let me just begin by saying how pleased I am to be here. I love the idea of Russian War Crimes House. You know, whoever had that brilliant idea, I congratulate them. But it's a very appropriate renaming of this institution here in Davos. Now, Human Rights Watch, as you noted, has had teams on the ground in Ukraine throughout the war, and indeed, you know, since 2014 and before. So what we do is we try to kind of provide an in-depth analysis as to whether the Geneva Conventions, international humanitarian law, is violated or not. You know, were war crimes committed or not? And it's important to do that because if you just see a body on the ground, you know, that's a tragedy, but it's not necessarily a war crime. You have to ask, you know, was this person executed, or were they, you know, indiscriminately shelled, or was it just the unfortunate consequence of, you know, the targeting of a military facility? And so you really have to go on the ground, interview the survivors, the eyewitnesses. We take photographs. We have separate teams who are collecting so-called open source material, so anything posted on social media, we download and analyze. We have a partnership with a satellite imagery company, so we can get It takes a picture of every place in the world every single day. And so it's like a time machine. You can say, well, what happened here over the last 5 or 10 days? And we can look day by day and figure out what happened. So a lot of work goes into analyzing, was this a war crime or not? Now, let me just say a word about, the term war crime, because international humanitarian law is quite specific. It says you cannot target a civilian. You have to only focus on military targets. You cannot fire indiscriminately. You've got to aim at the military target, not just bomb an entire neighborhood. Even if you are aiming at a military target, you have to take all feasible precautions to spare civilians. So that involves, the type of weaponry you use, the time of day, things of that sort, because the whole aim of the Geneva Conventions is to minimize the harm to civilians. Now, what we've seen in Ukraine is frankly not that different from what we saw in Chechnya and what we saw in Syria. This is the way that the Russian military operates when it faces significant military resistance. It doesn't just target the other side's military, as humanitarian law requires. It tries to harm civilians. It proceeds under the theory known as total war, where, in this case, Ukrainian civilians are treated as fair game. Now, that's a blatant war crime. That is completely illegal. That is the strategy that the Kremlin is pursuing. And my teams in Ukraine have documented many examples of these war crimes. We have had teams, throughout the villages and towns north of Kyiv, north of Chernihiv, and have seen time after time summary executions, the detention and torture of people, the holding of them in inhumane circumstances. We have not been into Mariupol, but we have spoken with many people who have fled Mariupol and have reported there on the indiscriminate bombardment, similar to what has been happening in, say, Kharkiv, but also the refusal to allow humanitarian aid in, the refusal to allow humanitarian evacuations of civilians, the forcing of civilians into Russia, as you were mentioning, through these filtration camps, which is kind of a euphemism for, often torture centers and certainly harsh interrogation, where people who fail the interrogation, it's unclear what happens to them, but, we're obviously very worried about more executions, certainly about torture in the course of these interrogations. So we have been, trying to look at the range of war crimes being committed. And we're doing it, not just describing in broad terms what's happening, but we're trying to do it by accumulating evidence. And we want that evidence, ultimately, so that the perpetrators can be prosecuted, and not just the soldier on the ground, but also the chain of command. And we also, frankly, want to deploy this information. We want the international community to have it, and we want the Russian people to have it. And so that kind of, in essence, is what Human Rights Watch has been up to over the last few months in Ukraine.
Many thanks. Can you mention how, and Ludmila also, how it important it to collect evidence of Russian war crimes? But we understand that to do it during ongoing war is very complicated. Could you please let us know the most important challenges do you have by doing it, and how we can, as country, overcome it? Because we need evidence, we need to be ready to go to the court.
Well, obviously there's security issues, so, in the middle of the fighting, it's hard to get there. We sometimes will use, open source investigation, but, as soon as the fighting ends, we try to send people in. I think one of the biggest challenges now is, first of all, the professionalization of the evidence collecting process, because many people are going in there who are not necessarily trained and who may actually be disturbing the evidence rather than preserving it. There also is a real problem of coordination, because, the Ukrainian government is doing a very big effort to collect evidence, but, so are various international governments and institutions, and there's not necessarily that much coordination among them. And I think we need to do that, both to avoid duplication of efforts, but also to try to assemble as best we can the evidence that we collect. Because in the end, I think there's going to be kind of multiple prosecutions. The Ukrainian government will clearly do what it can, particularly as we've seen the last few days. If there are Russian soldiers who are captured and there's evidence against them, they can be prosecuted right there in Ukraine. So that will be, one important avenue. A second will be the International Criminal Court, which will probably focus on the senior-most officials. That's, tends to be their mandate. So it's going to try to work the chain of command as high as it can, up to the top. And then the third thing that's worth mentioning is prosecutions by national governments, principally in Europe, under what's known as universal jurisdiction. And that's the concept that says, say a court in Germany can prosecute a Russian suspect for a war crime in Ukraine. Because a war crime is subject to universal jurisdiction, meaning any competent court, any place in the world can prosecute that person. And so I think that we're going to see, national courts using universal jurisdiction as an important supplement to both Ukrainian and the International Criminal Court's efforts.
Many thanks. Lyudmila, can you please also comment on collected evidence on Russian war crimes in Ukraine, especially from the side from Ukraine?
I absolutely agree with the colleague that the main thing to basically take to responsibility these persecutors, we need to first of all register these events and to get registration via interviews with victims. The mandate of the ombudsman gives me the opportunity, and that's my duty, to work with the victims of the military crimes, of the war crimes. We interview people who, for example, were taken out of Mariupol. We went to the town where they are now. Not all of them wanted to give such evidence because, taking into account psychological condition, sometimes they do not believe that that is what happened to them. But we managed to interview most people in Zaporizhzhia, and then when they were moved to Lviv, I have my offices everywhere in different regions, and we interviewed these people. And they registered these war crimes which were committed. For example, we have the evidence of a person who was in this theater when they were bombing it. They were bombing this field kitchen, so to say. They managed to get evacuated, but where to? To Azovstal. And then they were in Azovstal, and this person was in Azovstal and also gave evidence about how they were bombarded. How that is one method of registering war crimes, that's interview. Then we have exchanges. Our military exchanged those who were caught prisoners. We interview them and we register all the tortures which were committed against them. Sometimes you just think how this could happen when a person, a military person, what about the Geneva Convention about treating war prisoners? I believe in Russian Federation they don't know about that, and they take these people with a second head all over Russia, and when they interrogate them, they put this sack, they turn on the sore, and they say that will cut off all your limbs. And that is the pressure. These are tortures to get some evidence. And that is important, and we are registering that. And another registration is taking place via a telephone hotline. We have operators who are specially trained how to receive and correctly register the information. For example, I think someone called about searching for people who are missing, and that was 20,000 of our citizens who were missing. they send us the videos, the photographs, and we collect it all, and we started cooperating with the International Criminal Court. And we had this group of investigators together with their leader, and at the time when a month ago they were there, we gave them 27,000 requests. They saw how we are doing it, how we are registering, and they are happy with what we are doing. And we are ready. And we want a special international tribunal to be created so that these gaps between the mandates of the International Court of the UN and the International Criminal Court are filled in by the functionalities of the special tribunal, so that all these persecutors all these perpetrators, all those who committed crimes on our territory, they should receive punishment. Дякую.
You mentioned, Lyudmila and Ken, you both mentioned about importance of evidence of Russian war crimes. And of course, other important issue is responsibility. And I invite both of you to speak about responsibility. What should be done to get Russia to be responsible for all crimes happening in Ukraine? What should be done by Ukrainians and internationally?
Well, let me, talk from the perspective of the International Criminal Court, because it will try to aim as high as it can. In a sense, the role of other courts, including Ukraine's, will be to, go after the immediate perpetrators. But the International Criminal Court is going to look at the chain of command. And under international law, senior officials can be responsible if they either order a war crime, or through the concept of so-called command responsibility, if they are aware of war crimes and don't take steps to stop them and punish them. And what we're seeing, if you look, all the way to Putin, rather than, when word first got out, oh my goodness, there were executions in Bucha. If Putin was serious about upholding the Geneva Conventions, he would have said, that's terrible, that should stop immediately, Obviously, that's not what he did. In fact, he did almost the opposite. He said, that's fake news. You're making that up. Those are lies. It didn't happen. And the message from Putin is, go ahead, commit war crimes and we'll cover up for you, which is almost, evidence of command responsibility. He's also gone so far, if you look at his behavior, even back in Syria, and I mentioned that, what he's doing in Ukraine is the exact same thing that he did in Syria. He would give, awards to the generals who were overseeing, in Syria, it was the bombardment of hospitals and schools and marketplaces and apartment buildings. And then he would give them, the Hero of Russia award. So again, the message is, you're doing exactly what I want you to do. And this, is all going to be evidence against him. Now, Human Rights Watch did a chain of command analysis in Idlib province in northwestern Syria, where Russian jets were bombing civilian institutions over and over and over again. And we looked at 46 cases where this had happened, and were able to trace the chain of command up to Putin. Now, we haven't yet done that in the case of Ukraine, but a lot of similar evidence is there. But this is exactly what the International Criminal Court will do, because its aim will be to try to charge the most senior officials responsible. And Putin is obviously commander-in-chief of the Russian armed forces. He so far is giving no indication of trying to stop these war crimes, and every indication that that is the military strategy that he wants pursued.
Many thanks. And actually, recently, the first Russian soldier was pledged guilty in the war crimes trial for killing an unarmed Ukrainian. And from your experience, can such trial be a deterrent and prevent future human rights violation, or it's only one step and it actually doesn't mean a lot?
No, I actually think it's important because, if you're a low-level soldier in the Russian military, there's no evidence at this stage that you're getting instructions to avoid war crimes. The ethos seems to be, do what you want, you'll get away with it. And so if, this recent war crimes trial in Ukraine is a warning. It says, if you get captured and if you have been responsible for war crimes, you can get prosecuted and you get a very serious prison term. And there was just like the New York Times did an analysis just a few days ago where they obtained a video of Russian soldiers marching, I think it was 9 men, who basically were, executed immediately. And they're now, trying to use facial recognition software to identify who were those Russian soldiers. And again, that's a warning, this could be you. You think you'll get away with these atrocities, but you could be held responsible. So I think that's very, very important. Let me just mention one other thing, because you referred to it earlier. Obviously, we know that 1,000 or more Ukrainian soldiers have just surrendered to Russian forces in Mariupol, including members of the Azov Brigade. And these are all prisoners of war. And what that means under the Third Geneva Convention is that if you are a member of an opposing armed force in an international armed conflict, your prisoner of war status means you cannot be prosecuted simply for taking up arms. If all that you did was shoot at the military on the other side, that is not a crime with prisoner of war status. If you commit war crimes, if you shoot civilians or the like, if you torture, if you indiscriminately bombard, that is a war crime, you can be prosecuted. But a prisoner of war cannot be prosecuted simply for shooting at the other side. We need to watch what Russia does with these prisoners of war, these people who have been, who've surrendered out of Mariupol. Because if there's evidence that they committed war crimes, fine, they can be prosecuted. But if all that they have is that they were soldiers, shooting at Russian forces, that is protected. The Third Geneva Convention says they cannot be prosecuted. And so, I worry, Putin has not paid a lot of attention to the Geneva Conventions. I worry that he may just rip that up, stage a show trial, say that, oh, look, these are Nazis and we're just going to get them. And, that there's going to be a show trial, a propaganda effort in violation of the Third Geneva Convention. That hasn't happened yet. Human Rights Watch has been speaking out against that, but it's something to pay attention to.
Many thanks. Ludmila, you told us already about all efforts Ukraine is doing to secure human rights in Ukraine and to evident Russian war crimes in Ukraine. Do you feel that Ukraine have enough international experience, or would you prefer to have more international experience from international organizations, from countries? What is your feeling? Is it worth doing enough to support Ukraine on this very complicated way?
Підтримати Україну. Such an experience, this is what Ukraine gets for the first time. We had some experience in 2014, 2015, when the world was just concerned, deeply concerned with what was happening. But if then there were the sanctions applied like now, then there would be no 2022. Or Putin would have never bombarded Kiev. Maybe he would do something in Donbass, maybe he would do something there. But you understand, there was this deep concern, but the sanctions were such like a bite of a mosquito. So that is why we are gaining the experience, and we are working with our law enforcement bodies. And if we receive the information from citizens or from others, we give that to law enforcement bodies. But as to international, we cooperate as the institution. We cooperate with the European Court on Human Rights and International criminal court. We included, there was a lot of materials included into the report as to implementation of Moscow mechanism. There was such a report, and that confirms that we are talking about that there are war crimes and crimes of aggression. When Russian soldiers, they disguise themselves into Ukrainian uniform and they kill our border guards. And that is violation of the rules of war, which are to be followed. And there are many, many things like that. I'm sorry. Could you tell us and share with what's happening in Ukraine? You work with victims, you know about that. Here we have some of the evidence of war crimes, but what you hear from victims, what impresses you most? What impresses most is that they are talking about how Russian soldiers treat them. The first message in my messenger at Facebook, I received a message from a group of girls, and they wrote that there were many of them from 14 to 20 in Bucha. They were in basement, they were raped, and out of these 25 girls and women, several were pregnant. And do you understand? We need to interview them. We need to register that. But at that time, they were not ready to do that. They wanted just to get some psychological support, to tell someone about that. And then we started this hotline on psychological support. Now we have psychologists who work there 24/7, and most of these phone calls were about suicides. More than 500 suicides were committed, and out of them 140 are minors. The mothers call at night, for example. When I was on the way here, the head of this group of psychological support told me one mother of 3-year-old boy called at 3:40 in the morning, and she said, and she asked what to do. She wants to commit suicide. The child that they had been looking for, waiting for so long, this 3-year-old child was raped, and he just died. That's Alexandrivka of Kherson region. Alexandrivka now turned into Bucha, and they somehow are raping little children. Do you understand? When 6-month baby girl is raped by a teaspoon, or 9-month-old girl is raped by candle, or 1-year-old boy is raped by 5 orcs and he died, or the twins who were 2 years old, they also died, and that's again Alexandrivka. In Bucha, we received information from teenagers, from women, from girls. Yes, we gave them the opportunity to recover and explained how to, because if they got pregnant and if they cannot make abortion, what to do. But now it's different. Now there are suicides of parents, what they should do. The tactic is the same of Russian Federation, of using systemically everywhere with cruelty. They use this raping and other forms of sexual violence, but the objects changed. How to explain that? Why they are like they are? It's impossible to explain, because every one of us who's present there, we wouldn't do what they are doing, and we are thinking about what will happen when Mariupol is liberated, other towns of Kherson region, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, Lugansk regions are liberated. But what this criminal is doing, he's eliminating the evidence of the crimes. Because after Bucha, when all the world got horrified, they start either burying these bodies into huge graves, and we see 4 of them, and they are 350 meters long, but they also have 13 crematorias. They are burning the bodies, and who's doing it? Who's collecting these bodies? The colleague was talking about filtration camps. These are people who were not sent to Russian Federation because they did not give a correct answer. They did not say that they support this Russian special operation. They said this is the war. They were taken to these filtration or concentration camps. The one like in Olenivka, in Novozovsk region of Donetsk Oblast. They have more than 4,000 people there, and it was designed for 500. And they practically don't feed them. And now they use them to collect these bodies, to find these bodies in the theater, in the maternity house, and to eliminate the evidence of the crime. And when, in the beginning, during the opening, I told that Facebook banned me, and they deleted what I wrote last week about these crimes, about this sexual violence against our small children, our boys, and they deleted it because of moral, ethical norms. I am violating these norms now again, according to Facebook, but we need to know about all these crimes. All of us should know that, so that we can fight for our victory. But we would like to have fewer of such victims. Alexandrovka, it was in April when orcs were there. Now a month passed, and these people tell us about what was happening. And I thank many resolutions of the European Parliament, of the rights and human rights of UN. I thank them for reminding everyone about the crimes of Russian Federation, and I address member countries requesting for all the assistance to these victims, and irrespective of the national legislation of these countries, to help with abortions. And I think that we have such examples in Poland, for example, because in the past our girls, they don't want to make these abortions in our country because they don't want to live after that. They want to live after that. They want to live after that. We will win. But they go to different countries. And sometimes we would send them to Romania, to Germany, because it was impossible to do it in Poland. Now Poland is doing it, and I thank for the support of such women, and everything is ahead of us, but only thanks to the world being with us, next to us. Thank you. Thank you, Ludmila.
There is special strategy of Russian soldiers of raping Ukrainian women, children, so it's clear evidence of sexual violence. From your international experience, how we can to protect Ukrainian women, Ukrainian children, and how we can deal with trauma, what all this family getting from it?
Well, obviously, rape, sexual assault is another war crime. There's no question about that. I think the open question now is how extensive is it in Ukraine? And Human Rights Watch has received some accounts. We have not yet ourselves established a pattern, and I think this is something that needs investigation. And to be honest, we're conservative about this. We don't use the rhetoric before we have the evidence. And it's, it's bad enough to say that they're, the kinds of war crimes that I described. I think, frankly, there probably are also crimes against humanity in the sense that there is, systematic persecution of Ukrainians by virtue of their ethnicity and nationality. So there are very, very serious crimes here. I'm just, I'm very careful to make sure that rhetoric doesn't exceed the evidence we have, because it's, you don't need to do this kind of, escalation of rhetoric. What we have proven is plenty bad enough and deserves, huge efforts to try to stop.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry.
Just, take your microphone.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, my name is Mandy Sanghera, and I'm an international human rights activist, and I'm currently supporting Ukraine women in the UK who are claiming, refugee status. And there are other risks where people are host, and there are real issues about women being exploited, and these women who are becoming refugees. And before the pandemic, before this whole crisis, women in Ukraine were victims of trafficking and abuse already. We've seen that rape has been used in Bosnia and every other war that's gone on over the years. But I just wanted to introduce my colleague here as well, Tatiana, who is here from the OSCE, who's done a lot of work, and there's Leo as well. And I think there's some people who are doing a lot of work on the ground in Ukraine right now who are supporting those very women. And I think we need to have a joined up approach. If we could have 2 minutes, I would really appreciate it. Sorry, Tatiana.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Andy. My name is Tatiana Kotlarenko. I'm the advisor on anti-human trafficking issues at the Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights at the OSCE. And I just actually came back from a visit in Romania where we were assessing the trafficking risks to women and children, and not just in Romania, but all across both the transit and destination countries. And the situation is really worrying because you have women and children fleeing to situations of what they think are safety, but they face horrible risks of exploitation, especially the women actually and children who have experienced sexual violence are particularly vulnerable to further situations of sexual exploitation and other forms of exploitation. So that's something that we need to watch out for now, but also in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
If I
Tatiana.
could just say,
Sure.
you're absolutely right. Human Rights Watch has done some reporting on this. Obviously the vast majority of the refugees are women and children without men. The men are, for the most part, not allowed to leave Ukraine because there's a war and they need it for military service. So there is an inherent vulnerability here. Now, many Ukrainians have been fortunate in finding, friends and family in Europe who have been willing to take them in. But, a number are arriving without contacts, and there is a real need to ensure that they're just not, picked up by whoever picks them up, some of whom are not there for humanitarian purposes. And so this is, an issue that really deserves attention. Now, it is receiving some attention from, the border states, but that doesn't mean the problem is solved. And I think you're absolutely right to bring this up.
Many thanks. I see that there is one more comment from the floor. Please.
My friend Tatiana Kotlarenko, who is very close to Save Ukraine, has been working with Save Ukraine for many years. And thank you, Mandy, for your incredible work. I am the honorary advisor to Save Ukraine, Mykola Kuleba's foundation, NGO. He's the former commissioner for children to the president of Ukraine for 7 years. We operate extraordinarily, and our numbers talk for ourselves. We evacuate, provide emergency assistance, rehouse, rebuild, reunite, and we provided this help to more than 41,500 children and women. And this issue of trafficking is absolutely enormous and needs to be highlighted right now. So we're very grateful to be here and appreciate to talk with you, with Tatiana, Mandy, and you guys later.
Thank you very much for your comment. So there is one more comment, please.
I'll give it back to you in a second. Hello, my name is Esther Dingemans. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Survivors Fund, and we work with victims of conflict-related sexual violence around the world. And I was in Kiev a few weeks ago, and I would like to ask you something again about what you say about the escalation of the rhetoric, because being there, speaking a lot to victims, and we have worked with victims in Ukraine from 2014-15, the victims of sexual violence at the time. We hear your testimonies, and there are so many already that are not yet documented officially, but the reports are so many already, with La Strada, with all of the other NGOs. And like you're saying, some women and girls are not ready yet for the proper and official documentation. So isn't there also the risk on the other side that we're too cautious by not wanting to escalate the rhetoric, but at the same time then not yet recognizing how this war crime of sexual violence is really used at the moment?
Look, it's clearly a risk, and so I mean, I think we're right to talk about it as a problem. Human Rights Watch doesn't use rhetoric before we have the evidence. You know, it's just, that's how we operate, and frankly, how we should operate. You know, so as other people collect evidence, that changes the picture. So at this stage, I think the right thing to do, at least for us, is to talk in warning terms. You know, we're not saying, you know, there are clear cases of rape. We're not saying rape is being used as a war strategy. We can't really prove that yet, you know. It may come to that. I'm not precluding it. We just don't have that evidence yet. And that's why, I mean, we're just inherently conservative in this, and we you know, are led by the evidence. So we should keep collecting that evidence, and we may change the conclusion.
If I may add, I'm so sorry, I think this is rather important. I was in Kyiv 2 days ago. I was in the south of Ukraine only a few days ago. And I have met personally some of the victims, including people with disabilities are also concerned. And this is absolutely awful. I have met this 24-year-old mentally disabled who was raped and is pregnant.
There's no question this is happening. I mean, nobody.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah. I think it was important to share a personal story.
I mean, you're absolutely right. So, I mean, I think everybody accepts that this is a problem. What we just don't know is how systematic it has become. And that's what we're looking at.
Excuse me?
Yes.
Людмила, я вам дякую за всю вашу роботу, яку ви робите. Це ці факти, про які ви вже кажете дуже довго. Їх не потрібно підтверджувати, бо вони вже підтверджені. Вони вже підтверджені життям. Я живу,
I live in Germany, and I work with refugees, and what they talk about, it's awful. All the time I follow your speeches. That's awful. А тепер до вас запитання.
This way to prove how extensional it is. And what do you mean, how extensional it is? Raped women, raped babies, raped children. How long should be? And how much time do you need just to prove it? It has been proved. It has already been proved. That's the point. And that's we're just talking. And no one knows what people feel being there, being raped a couple of times by many people and by horrible circumstances and situations. And that's the point. How long should it be? How much time does it need to prove? How many evidences do you need? That's the point. Thank you very much. Дякую вам дуже.
No, as I say, I don't deny that it's happening. We're just trying to, you know, the issue for us is the extent of it. And that's what we're studying. You know, I mean, similarly with the executions, we have many examples of executions. We're trying to understand, you know, it clearly has been pervasive in the villages and towns, you know, north of Kyiv, north of Chernihiv. You know, we don't yet know what's happening in Kherson around there. We don't yet know what happened in Mariupol. So these are, you know, we don't speculate about this. We've got to kind of collect the facts. And it's frustrating, you know, as the war is going, as access is limited, it's frustrating when you don't know everything. And that's, you know, that's just kind of inherent in the practice of documenting war crimes, is you got to be led by the evidence.
Yeah.
Do you understand? As a lawyer, I understand you, that you need to register, to have a protocol, someone has to interrogate. I gave evidence myself that I'm talking about these stories. The evidence were given by psychologists who render assistance to such victims, and well, law enforcement people, they tell, and did they use how did they use the teaspoon? My mandate, first of all, covers the issue of helping victims. I'm taking care of victims, and I need to give the chance to a victim to live on, because I told you how many suicides because of what happened to them, or what happened in at their eyes, and more than 200, and these are just statements about sexual violence, and 80 of them were committed against minors. And all these things, raping, suicide, different forms. But I understand that there should be evidence for the world, so that Putin and all his supporters are punished. We work now with the Deputy General Secretary of the UN, Mr. Guterres, and there's a special representative of preventing sexual violence in conflicts. I met her, she was in Kiev, and we agreed that in my office, on the basis of my office and offices in the regions, there will be special psychologists, lawyers trained, and the platforms will be created so that the victims could provide evidence once to professionals. You know, sometimes when they collect evidence from minors, we need green rooms and to organize such information campaign so that the victim understands that it's safe for the victim. To give evidence means to survive through the tragedy that they had already survived through. Are they ready to do that? Now we have just very few people like that who are ready. But first, the person should continue living with this burden, with this tragedy. And I thank to all the countries who receive such women, and there are many of them in Poland, in Czech Republic, in Germany. They provide such psychological help to them there. And I believe that's more important now than making the protocols of the minutes of
Actually, we are approaching to closing remark, and my last question would be for both of you. What could we do all together to reduce of number of war victims in general and especially of Ukraine? And Lyudmila, special question to you. What can do everyone from us, each country, international community, to help Ukraine to stop this war?
First of all, people should know about that. We need to inform the society. We need to talk to the neighbors, to tell to the neighbor about that, so that everyone knows, so that they push their governments, their parliaments who make decisions as to strengthening sanctions against Russian Federation, strengthening personal sanctions against those who are issuing such orders. That's their tactic, that's their weapon. And the next thing, when people say that the world, that the peace could be achieved without weapons, weapons is like continuation of war. Weapons is helping us get victory, and that is why we need the offensive weapons. And a lot of things, how the Second Army of the world differs from us. They differ only in numbers, and we need to reduce their numbers. And that could be done only with weapons, and I would appreciate if every one of you makes a step in this way. Please tell others, and please press, your authorities, your governments. Only together we can defeat this enemy who's called.
I mean, I agree that the international pressure has been absolutely critical. But let me make a different point. I think that the pressure that Putin is most sensitive to, and we all recognize this is Putin's war. It never would have happened without Putin himself deciding. But the pressure he is most sensitive to is the pressure from the Russian people. Putin is terrified of a color revolution. He is terrified of an uprising. And so I know that there's a tendency in Ukraine to feel like, all Russians are the enemy. That's a mistake. There have been, despite the censorship, despite the disinformation, despite the threatened 15-year prison terms for anybody who opposes Putin, there have been anti-war protests in 150 cities across Russia. And it's important to treat the Russian people, at least elements of them, as potential allies. Human Rights Watch has been making every effort that everything we publish, we translate into Russian, and we try to get it into Russia, through Telegram, through YouTube, through VPNs, because, and in fact, 10% of the Russian people have now downloaded VPNs. There is this thirst for true information, thirst to get beyond the Kremlin's disinformation and censorship. And I think it's important to remember this. I've had, I should say, somewhat disturbing conversations with certain Ukrainian officials who say every Russian is guilty. Every Russian backs this. Every Russian thinks that Crimea is part of Russia and therefore they're all guilty. That's a mistake. I think we have to look at the Russian people as, in a sense, victims of Putin himself. Yes, some Russians back the war, I'm sure, but enough of them don't want these atrocities committed in their name, and we need to keep speaking to them and informing them, because I think that their internal pressure within Russia is going to be absolutely essential in trying to curtail the atrocities and end the war.
Ludmila, thank you for being today with us, and thank you for sharing your insight. Thank you.